She was 21 and discarded. No wages, no room, no family name. She could safely use just a canvas tool roll and $6 she had hidden beneath a loose shoe lining. And with that $6, she bought a forgotten clock dial painter's loft outside Waterbury in New Haven County, Connecticut, abandoned from county maps in 1978. The north roof sagged nearly 9 inches. 3 window frames had rotted through. The county condemned it on October 3, 2023, with demolition planned for the following spring. Behind the lead-lined wall of an old radium paint box, sealed since the 1920s, waited a narrow compartment holding what no inspector had ever found. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Ines Maribel Vega had been painting her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Bridgeport, she drew Roman numerals on bottle caps and arranged them around saucers to make clocks that never moved. Her father left before she could remember his voice. Her mother Celia worked laundry shifts and kept every pencil worn down to the metal, though she never asked what Ines drew after dark. Steadiness came from Celia's uncle, Elena Serrano, who lived above a repair shop where the walls ticked at different speeds. He restored carriage clocks, ship chronometers, and pocket watches, whose owners had stopped expecting them back. Every Saturday, Ines rode 2 buses to him, carrying bread wrapped in a dish towel. Mateo gave her a stool, a magnifying loupe, and one task at a time. She learned to grind a sable brush to 3 hairs and steady her wrist while painting a rose no larger than a lentil. At noon, they ate boiled eggs beside the open back door, listening to clock movements breathe in their trays. "Honest work leaves no room for hurry," Mateo told her once, after she blurred a numeral and tried to hide it with thicker paint. He meant that repair began with admitting where the line had gone wrong. Mateo died during a February thaw, seated at his bench, with a loupe still clipped to his glasses. By the time Ines reached the shop, the landlord had emptied it. The clocks went to auction, the brushes into a bin, and the walnut tool chest vanished beneath a label marked "Contents Abandoned." Celia signed the release without reading it. At 20, Ines found work at Merit Precision Time Works, a modern clock plant in Naugatuck, where the floors shone and the air carried a sweet metallic odor beneath the disinfectant. The plant director, Franklin Voss, wore gear-shaped cufflinks and spoke quietly enough that people leaned toward him. He never shouted. He only paused beside a worker's station, folded his hands, and asked whether the person intended to remain employable. Production numbers rose after those visits. So did the headaches. Ines noticed a rinse vat venting poorly above the dial coating line. 2 women developed nosebleeds. A maintenance gauge had been covered with tape. She photographed the reading and filed a written report. 3 days later, Voss called her into his office and placed a cracked enamel dial on the desk. "You damaged company property and falsified safety records," he said. Her dismissal letter was waiting beside it. That evening, a maintenance man arrived at the worker lodging with a gray plastic bin. He set it outside room 14 and placed Ines's folded coat on top. Celia stood in the hallway, still wearing her laundry uniform. Voss had already telephoned her, warning that anyone sheltering Ines could lose company housing. "Take your things and do not come back." 8 words. Her mother said them without looking up. Ines lifted the bin. A porcelain palette slid against a tin cup with a sound like a spoon touching a tooth. Celia's hands tightened around a damp bedsheet, but she did not open the door again. By midnight, frost had silvered the curb. And Ines was walking south with the bin balanced against her hip until one handle split. For 6 weeks, she followed warmth. In Naugatuck, she slept behind the boiler room of a closed church until a custodian found her and left without calling police. In Waterbury, she spent 2 nights in the stairwell of the old railway station, waking whenever footsteps slowed. In Bristol, she slept beneath a laundromat vent, her coat smelling of hot soap and diesel. Her money fell to $5.12 after bus fare, then $3.40 after bread, apples, and aspirin. She stopped counting hunger by meals and measured it by whether her hands shook when she tried to thread a needle. A shelter volunteer named Mrs. Keene, with a violet scarf pinned beneath her chin, gave Ines a wool blanket and said, "Keep your fingers warm. They are your trade." A bus driver let her ride to the end of the line. A librarian in Waterbury began setting aside yesterday's newspaper without comment. On November 16th, Ines sat beneath the green-shaded lamps of the Silas Bronson Library, drying her socks against the radiator. She turned the classified pages, slowly searching for janitorial workroom shares, anything requiring steady hands. Near the bottom of an estate notice between a snowblower and a damaged church organ, a narrow advertisement had been boxed in blue pencil. Abandoned work loft. Clock district outbuilding. Tax title. $6 cash. Buyer assumes all risk. The notice gave no photograph, only a parcel number, and a deadline at 4 o'clock the following afternoon. Someone had written M. Serrano in the margin beside it, then rubbed the pencil until the paper thinned. Ines folded the advertisement along its columns and placed it inside Mateo's old tool roll. She spent her final coins on a bus ticket north and kept the $6 untouched in her shoe. By dawn, she was traveling toward a building the county had already decided should disappear. The bus left Waterbury before sunrise, carrying Ines 12 miles north through neighborhoods where porch lights burned above wet pavement. At Watertown, she changed to a county route that ran only as far as Thomaston, then walked the remaining 11 miles with the plastic bin tied shut by clothesline. The wind pressed steadily from the northwest. By afternoon, the temperature had fallen to 34 degrees. She followed an old service road until darkness erased the painted markings. A hay barn stood beyond a collapsed fence, its doors chained but separated from the ground by several inches. Ines pushed her blanket through the opening, then slid beneath it on her back. The hay inside smelled of dust mouse nests and the last warmth of summer. She slept between two square bales while sleet struck the metal roof. At dawn, a thermometer nailed beside the door read 28 degrees. The final road descended beside a narrow branch of the Naugatuck River, where black water moved beneath shelves of ice. By 9 o'clock, she reached Beacon Falls, a town gathered closely around the old rail line. She passed D'Amato's, Webb's Shoe Repair, the Beacon, Lunch Counter, Kiley Brothers, Hardware, and a florist called Fern and Thistle, where buckets of chrysanthemums stood behind steamed glass. No one appeared to notice the gray bin cutting into her hands. The county clerk maintained a satellite office in a former savings bank on North Main Street. Brass letters remained above the entrance, though the glass door now carried a paper sign reading Land Records and Tax Sales. Heat met Ines with the dry smell of radiators, carbon paper, and floor wax. Behind the counter sat a woman with one clouded eye and a silver pencil pushed through her bun. Her nameplate read Evelyn Harrow, Deputy Clerk. Ines set the classified advertisement on the counter. Mrs. Harrow looked at the paper, then at Ines's damp shoes. "You understand the parcel has no legal water service?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the roof has failed inspection?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the town will not insure it?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the demolition order transfers with ownership?" "Yes, ma'am." The clerk leaned back. Her good eye remained on Ines's face while the wall clock behind her counted 7 deliberate seconds. "Most people ask whether $6 is a mistake. I only need to know if it is enough." Mrs. Harrow opened a drawer and removed a deed packet fastened with green thread. The property had belonged to the Brass Hollow Time Works, dissolved in 1931. A later owner had paid taxes through 1977, then disappeared from the record. The municipality had acquired it by tax title, but could not justify the cost of clearing the steep lot. $6 covered the filing fee left unpaid from the final transfer. Ines took the folded bills from her shoe lining. They were soft at the corners and faintly marked by blue dye from her sock. The clerk counted them once. She fed the deed beneath a brass embossing stamp and pulled the handle down with both hands. The seal entered the paper with a dull official bite. "You will take Burton Road north for 1 mile," she said. "Turn left after the stone culvert, where this pavement becomes Old Clock Lane. The parcel begins at the second iron post. Do not follow the logging track downhill. That belongs to the Reservoir Authority." She began to slide the deed across the counter, then stopped. "Vega," she said. "Is that your father's name?" "My mother's. And Serrano." Ines's hand remained on the edge of the counter. "My great-uncle." Mrs. Harrow removed her glasses. A pale groove marked the bridge of her nose. "Matteo Serrano repaired our courthouse clock for 26 years. Would not accept the replacement movement they ordered from Ohio. Said the old one was not broken, only neglected." The clerk turned toward a filing cabinet and opened the lowest drawer. From behind a row of survey maps, she brought out a small envelope yellowed around its metal clasp. "He came here in 1998 asking about this parcel. He said his mother had painted dials somewhere near Brass Hollow when she was young. There were no surviving employment books, and I found nothing under Serrano. He never returned." Inside the envelope was a photocopy of a tax map with one structure circled in Matteo's narrow handwriting. In the margin he had drawn a small rose with 4 leaves, the same mark he once placed beneath every clock he restored. Mrs. Harrow laid the copy beside the new deed. "He may have been looking for what you just purchased." Outside the day had brightened without becoming warmer. Ines folded both papers into the canvas tool roll and started north. Burton Road climbed beyond the last row of houses, passing stone walls buried in bittersweet vine. Near the culvert, an elderly man in a brown cap was splitting kindling beside a mailbox marked Bell. His black and white dog approached the road, but stopped at one lift of the man's gloved hand. "You headed to the old dial shop," he called. Ines nodded. "Dog's named Mercy. She won't trouble you." Mercy watched Ines pass one white paw held above the frozen grass. Old Clock Lane narrowed between walnut trees, whose branches met overhead like dark wire. Wind moved the remaining leaves along the ditches. At the second iron post, Ines found a footpath, hidden beneath nettles, and descended toward a low ridge above the river. The loft stood where the slope leveled built of dark red brick over a fieldstone base. It measured perhaps 24 feet long and 16 feet wide, with 1 story below a steep loft roof. Cedar shingles had curled away from the north pitch, and a brick chimney leaned slightly toward the trees. Above the door hung a wooden sign bleached almost blank. When Ines brushed away the lichen with her sleeve, 3 words appeared beneath it. "Serrano Dial Rooms." The key supplied by the clerk resisted twice before turning. The door opened inward over a ridge of dirt. Cold air came out carrying cedar iron and something mineral that touched the back of her tongue. Ines stepped into the front room. Her shoe crushed a white enamel fragment, producing a clean snap in the silence. A work table stood beneath the eastern windows, its surface scarred by circles where hot crucibles had rested. When she dragged one finger across it, the dust felt as fine as flour. Light entered through cracks in the shutters and settled on hundreds of pale marks along the walls. They were not stains. They were clock faces hung from square nails, each one missing its hands. In the back room, rain had darkened the plaster around the chimney. A cast-iron stove stood open, holding a nest made from paper labels. The air smelled of old soot and wet lime. Somewhere beneath the floor, water moved with a patient, hollow sound. Ines placed her palm against the stove and felt cold pass into her bones. A narrow stair rose to the loft. Every third tread complained beneath her weight. Above, she found sloping walls, a horsehair mattress frame, and an east window filmed with grime. She rubbed a circle clear with her cuff. The river below reflected a strip of silver sky. Before darkness, she returned to the front room and secured the door with a bent iron hook. She ate half an apple, then spread Mrs. Keene's blanket beneath the work table. The floor pressed hard against her shoulder. Wind entered through the window frames and carried the faint taste of snow. Near midnight, something shifted behind the back wall with a wooden click, followed by silence. Ines sat up and listened until the building settled around her. She did not light the final match in her pocket. For the first time in 6 weeks, there was a door between her and the road. Some things do not disappear. They wait for careful hands. At first light, Ines carried the gray bin outside and followed the sound beneath the floor. A stone-lined well stood 30 yards downhill, hidden behind Waterbury and a fallen gate. Its wooden cover had split, but the water below looked clear when she lowered a tin cup on clothesline. She boiled it for 10 minutes on a camp stove borrowed from Mr. Bell. The outhouse leaned behind 2 hemlocks, its door hanging from one leather hinge. She repaired the hinge with cord and learned to step over the 3rd floorboard inside the loft, which gave a sharp report whenever her weight crossed its center. By the 3rd day, she knew the building's smaller sounds. The south wall clicked when sunlight reached it. The loft stairs creaked in descending notes. The sound behind the back room came only after midnight, when the temperature dropped and the old boards contracted. She needed heat before she could investigate anything. Kiley Brothers Hardware occupied a long, narrow storefront where wooden bins still held nails by weight. The air smelled of kerosene pine shavings, and the bitter coffee kept on a warming plate beside the register. Behind it stood Samuel Kiley, a broad man with one eyebrow divided by a white scar. He listened while Ines explained the property, then removed a carpenter's pencil from behind his ear. "How much can you pay today?" "Nothing until I find work." He rolled the pencil between his palms. "That building will kill you faster cold than poor." Samuel opened a ruled ledger and wrote Vega Ines beneath accounts belonging to the church, the florist, and Mr. Bell. 30-day credit, he said. No interest. You bring me receipts if you sell anything from the property. I am not selling what belongs there. His scarred eyebrow lifted slightly. Then bring me payment when you can. He added a stained copy of the Homeowner's Manual of Practical Repairs, published in 1966, and refused to enter it in the ledger. Ines bought a 6-inch chimney brush for $8.40, 2 fiberglass rods at $3.10 each, a canvas drop cloth for $4.75, stove cement for $2.25, and a box of long kitchen matches for 69 cents. Samuel found an old coal shovel beneath the stairs and sent that with her as well. The chimney cap had collapsed inward, so Ines climbed onto the south roof from an apple ladder Mr. Bell carried over without conversation. She tied the ladder to the chimney with sash cord and tested each rung twice. From above, she lowered the round wire brush through the flue, turning it clockwise so it would not unscrew from the rods. Each foot of descent released a dry, scratching sound inside the masonry. Below, she had sealed the stove opening with the canvas cloth, leaving one corner loose around the rod. Black powder escaped anyway, coating her cuffs and settling into the lines beside her fingernails. The first pass brought down flakes of glazed creosote as thick as broken pottery. She repeated the stroke until the brush moved without catching, then scraped the smoke shelf with a bent spoon wired to a broom handle. It took 6 hours. When she opened the cloth, soot spilled across the hearth in a low black mound. She shoveled it into the galvanized bucket, checked the stovepipe for pinholes with a candle flame, and pressed stove cement into 2 seams where the flame trembled. She waited until morning for the cement to harden. The first fire began with newspaper twisted beneath cedar splinters. Smoke hesitated in the firebox, curled once toward the room, then drew upward. Ines held her hand near the pipe and felt warmth travel slowly into the iron. She cooked oats in the tin cup with half an apple sliced through them. The meal tasted faintly of smoke and metal, but steam rose against her face, and she ate sitting on the floor with both hands around the cup. Afterward, she opened the shutters in the back workroom. The daylight revealed what darkness had flattened. 7 sable brushes rested in a rack made from bone, their tips hardened into black needles. A porcelain mixing slab bore circles of faded vermilion and cobalt. Beside it lay a brass compass, an enamel kiln fork, 3 packets of gold leaf gone brown at the edges, and a magnifying lens mounted on an articulated iron arm. Dozens of unfinished dials filled shallow drawers, each wrapped in onion skin paper. Some carried only guide marks. Others had Roman numerals painted so finely that the serifs remained visible beneath dust. Against the western wall stood a wooden paint box, no larger than a bread chest. Lead sheeting covered its inner surfaces, dulled to the color of storm water. The lid bore a warning label from the Radium Luminous Material Corporation of Orange, New Jersey. Someone had drawn Mateo's 4-leaf rose beneath it. Ines did not open the box. She first cleared the table and examined the floor around it. The rear legs had settled evenly into the boards, but scrape marks showed the box had once been moved frequently. When she tapped the lid with the bone handle of a brush, it answered with a flat, heavy knock. The side panels sounded the same. The back panel did not. Its lower right corner gave a quieter note, hollow and restrained. Ines measured the box from front to back, then compared the interior depth to the exterior. Nearly 3 inches were missing. She lifted one end. The box was heavier than cedar, and lead should have made it with the weight pulling unevenly toward the hidden space. 4 screws secured the rear lining. Their slots were filled with wax. She warmed the wax with a spoon held over the stove, lifted it away with a needle, and turned each screw a quarter rotation at a time. Behind the lead sheet sat a cedar disc carved with the rose mark. It fit inside a circular recess without any visible hinge. Ines placed 2 fingers against the carving and pressed. The disc moved inward, then sprang forward far enough for her fingernail to catch its edge. A narrow panel released from the back of the box. Inside lay 3 packages wrapped in oilcloth, a tin document case, and a smaller wooden tray. She carried each item to the work table before opening anything. The compartment smelled of cedar resin and dry paper, untouched by the damp that had entered the walls. The first package held a dial painter's hand rest, a curved strip of polished walnut mounted on brass feet, allowing the wrist to hover above wet enamel. Beside it were 2 agate burnishers, a silver ferrule for shaping brushes, and a pair of fine-point dividers engraved with the name Elena Serrano. The second contained raw materials in sealed glass tubes. One held powdered cobalt enamel. Another carried gold chloride crystals inside a second protective vial. A folded label gave firing notes in a careful hand, but Ines left it closed. The third package was heavier. Inside were bank straps, cloth rolls, and small paper envelopes marked by year. She opened them one at a time. $20 gold certificates lay flat beneath waxed paper. $10 Federal Reserve notes followed, then $5 silver certificates, and $2 United States notes bearing red seals. The cloth rolls held Liberty Head half-eagles, St. Gaudens double-eagles, Barber half-dollars, and worn silver dollars, whose edges had darkened almost black. At the bottom rested a bronze victory medal suspended from a faded rainbow ribbon. The reverse showed a shield and fasces. A small bar above it read, Meuse Argonne 1918. Ines counted the money on the table. She began with the paper currency recording each denomination in the back of Samuel Kiley's repair manual. Then she counted the gold by face value stopped, and counted again by the handwritten amounts on the envelopes. She arranged the silver coins in stacks of 10 and checked every stack against the next. At midnight the sum was $52,800. She counted it a third time. Nothing changed. The tin document case remained unopened near her elbow. Its clasp had been tied with blue thread and sealed beneath a drop of red wax impressed with the four-leaf rose. Through the thin metal she could feel the firm outline of a folded book and several loose pages. Ines wrapped the money again, returned the metal to its cloth, and slid the packages beneath the work table. She placed the tin case beside her blanket, but did not break the seal. Outside, moonlight lay across the river in narrow moving plates. She walked downhill until she reached the bank and stood among the leafless alders. The water carried twigs beneath a rim of ice, taking each one around the bend without noise or hesitation. Behind her, the loft windows held the weak amber light of the stove. She stayed beside the river until her hands began to ache from the cold, watching the current keep what it could and release what it could not. Some things do not disappear. They wait for careful hands. Morning entered through the eastern window and found the tin case where Ines had left it. She heated water, washed the river mud from her hands, and sat at the work table before touching the red seal. The rose impressed in the wax had 4 leaves, but one was smaller than the others, bent inward exactly as Matteo had always drawn it. When she cut the blue thread, she already knew the handwriting inside. The first page began in dark brown ink. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have opened this box, then either the building has outlived me or my courage has. I pray it is the building. My name is Elena Maria Serrano. In March of 1927, Dr. Harrison Martell of New Haven told me that the pain in my jaw and the weakness in my blood were caused by radium poisoning. He did not say the word gently. There was no gentle way to say it. 3 women from our room had already died, and the company physician had called their illnesses poor teeth, weak constitutions, and female nerves. I began painting luminous dials in Waterbury in 1919. We were taught to bring the brush to a point with our lips. Lip dip paint. The powder shone on our sleeves and in our hair. We laughed when our teeth glimmered in the dark. The foreman told us the material was harmless, though they handled it with metal tongs. My mother, Isabel Serrano, came from Ponce in 1888 and painted enamel numerals in New Haven by 1894. Her father, Tomas Rivera, repaired marine chronometers in San Juan before 1870. His mother, Lucia Rivera, painted devotional miniatures near Mayagüez when Puerto Rico was still under Spain. 4 generations made small marks meant to outlast the hands that placed them. I was the first to make those marks glow. My husband Gabriel was killed in France during the Meuse-Argonne fighting in October 1918. The metal enclosed here came home without him. Our son Matteo was born 7 months later. I kept the shop because clocks were the only language I knew well enough to feed him. The luminous trade in this room closed on June 14, 1929. I locked the radium compounds inside their lined box and never used them again. For more than 30 years, I told no one where the records were hidden. Silence protected my child from the company men, but it also protected the lie. I have carried both facts. If you work at the enamel bench, heat the white ground slowly to 380 degrees Fahrenheit, never faster than 100 degrees each quarter hour. Mix 1 measure gum tragacanth with 4 measures distilled water for numeral paint. Let each black line dry 12 minutes before correcting it. Fire gold decoration last below 100 degrees, or it will cloud and retreat from the glass. Never shape a luminous brush with your mouth. Not once. The money came from wages, Gabriel's insurance, and the sale of 2 houses after the war. I saved it because money can preserve time when work cannot. Use it for the roof for warmth and for the tools that allow honest hands to continue. Do not confuse inheritance with ownership. A craft is inherited only when someone accepts the patience, danger, and duty inside it. Behind the shop, beyond the walnut roots, Gabriel placed a stone marker where the ground rises above the river. There is no body beneath it. Only his name and the year he did not return. Tell the truth about the women if anyone is willing to hear it. Keep their names with the records. They were not careless. They were instructed. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Elena Maria Serrano, November 2, 1961. Ines read the letter twice. The second reading was slower. She held the paper only at its edges and stopped where Elena had written Mateo's name. Then she folded every sheet along the original creases, matching the softened corners exactly, and returned them to the case without replacing the thread. The journal beneath the letter contained dates, batch numbers, symptoms, and the names of 37 women. Some entries ended after a single line. Others continued for years in progressively unsteady handwriting. Ines closed the cover before reaching the final page. She took Elena's directions and went through the back door. Walnut roots had lifted the ground into long ridges behind the loft. Ines walked toward the river until she found a rise concealed by mountain laurel. Beneath its dead leaves stood a slate marker no higher than her knee. Moss covered the face. She cleared it with the edge of her sleeve. Gabriel Serrano. He kept faith with his hands. At the base lay a rusted clock key and one blue glass bead. Ines left both where they were. She placed the victory medal against the slate for a moment, its faded ribbon moving in the wind, then carried it back inside. That afternoon, she cleaned the enamel kiln fork with oil and fine steel wool. She did not restore it to brightness. She removed only the loose rust, preserving the dark places where Elena's fingers had held it. Ines arranged 3 charcoal pieces in the stove and set the fork across the top. Heat entered the iron gradually. The worn handle turned from cold black to a deep, quiet gray. She watched until its shadow sharpened on the hearthstone, then lifted it with a folded cloth. The object had not become new. It had become usable. Near dusk, Mrs. Keene's blanket slipped from the work table and reminded Ines of the shelter's warm hallway. The chipped tin cup recalled Mr. Bell's camp stove. Samuel's repair manual lay open beside the ledger account he had trusted her to repay. Even Mrs. Harrow's photocopy creased from the journey had been given without a filing fee or request for proof. None of them had offered rescue. They had offered one useful thing at the necessary hour. Perhaps you remember such a kindness. Not the largest gift you received, but the small one that arrived when your hands were empty. Who gave it to you, and what ordinary object still carries that person's care? Ines wrapped the journal in clean cotton and placed it beside the letter, the dividers, and the handrest. That night, she slept with the heirlooms beneath the work table close enough that her outstretched fingers could touch the walnut case. Snow came on, December 2, 6 inches by dawn, softening the abandoned lane and outlining every gap in the roof with white. Ines stood beneath the rafters and watched meltwater gather in a tin basin. Then she opened Samuel Kiley's repair manual to the roofing chapter and read it 3 times, once for sequence, once for measurements, and once for everything that could kill her. The roof measured 26 feet by 18 along each pitch. Allowing 10% for waste, she calculated 18 bundles of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 14 pounds of hot-dipped nails. Samuel checked the figures, crossed out one line, and set an old roofing hatchet on the counter. "My brother carried this 30 years, he said. The handle was smooth where another palm had worn it. A retired roofer named Amos Bell arrived the next morning in a wool vest and refused the money Ines tried to offer. He examined the bowed north pitch, pressed his thumb into one rafter, and said they would sister it rather than replace the whole frame. For 11 days, they worked above the frozen walnut trees. Ines fastened a new length of spruce beside the weakened rafter, drawing the two together with carriage bolts. Amos snapped a chalk line across the felt and taught her to drive each nail in 3 strokes set sink finish. That nail's proud. Ines touched the raised head. Pull it. They spoke little beyond measurements. Snowmelt ran through her sleeves. Cedar dust gathered inside her gloves. At sunset, they covered each unfinished course with canvas and weighted it with bricks. By December 15, the last ridge shingles overlapped cleanly beneath a strip of lead flashing. Ines climbed down after dark and stood inside during a hard rain. The basins remained empty. The chimney demanded slower work. Several exterior bricks had spalled until their faces resembled red shells. Mortar turned to powder beneath the point of Ines's trowel. She removed each damaged joint to a depth of 3/4 of an inch, brushed away the grit, and misted the masonry, so the old brick would not steal water from the repair. Samuel helped her mix 2 parts hydraulic lime, 1 part washed sand, and 1 part fire clay for the joints nearest the flue. The mortar had to hold its shape without becoming stiff. Ines learned to turn it with the trowel until a lifted ridge bent but did not slump. For 3 weeks, temperatures remained in the 20s. Gloves dulled her touch, so she worked barehanded and warmed her fingers beside a charcoal brazier every 15 minutes. Some mornings she could not close them around the pointing tool until the second warming. She replaced 9 bricks, rebuilt the upper shoulder, and reset the cap with a slight slope to shed rain. Inside, she patched the smoke chamber and checked the flue with a mirror and a lantern lowered on cord. On January 27th, she laid a small test fire. Smoke rose straight through the throat, entered the repaired flue, and vanished above the roof without touching the room. Outside, Amos watched the chimney for several minutes, then gave one nod. Ines went back inside and held both hands over the stove until feeling returned. Beneath soot and paint lay white pine planks nearly 14 inches wide, fastened with hand-cut rosehead nails. Ines drove each loose nail below the surface with a narrow punch, then rented a random orbit sander from Samuel for $14 per day. She began with 80 grit paper, moving with the grain, and keeping the machine in motion so it would not carve circles into the pine. The second pass at 120 grit removed the coarse scratches. The final pass at 220 left the boards smooth enough to catch light without becoming slick. Dust entered everything. It silvered her hair, lined the stove door, and formed pale drifts beneath the workbench. She vacuumed twice, then wiped the floor with cloths dampened in mineral spirits. The first oil coat disappeared almost at once. The second remained on the surface for 10 minutes before she rubbed it thin. After the third, she closed the room for a 48-hour cure and slept in the loft with the window cracked despite the cold. The boards changed from dull dark honey toward mahogany, especially around the old nail heads. Marks left by dropped tools and chair legs remained beneath the finish. Ines did not sand them away. One morning she woke before dawn, with her shoulders locked and her right hand unable to grip the tin cup. She walked to the marsh instead of working. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, motionless, except for the feathers at its throat. Ines sat on a fallen trunk and watched it for nearly an hour. When it finally lifted its wings, opened slowly enough to disturb the water without breaking its reflection, she returned after sunset and did no work that day. There were 8 windows in the loft. 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked from corner to corner, and 1 held an original pane dated to 1788 by the faint waviness and trapped bubbles in its surface. Ines preserved that pane. She removed each sash, labeled its position in pencil, and scraped the old putty without forcing the points beneath the glass. The replacement panes came from a salvage yard and varied slightly in tone, which made them kinder to the old frames than modern glass would have been. For glazing, she rolled P33 putty between her palms until it softened, pressed a thin bedding layer into the rabbet, and set each pane with steady pressure at the edges. After placing glazier's points, she drew the putty knife along the bevel in one continuous stroke, keeping the interior sightline narrow and even. The sash cords had rotted to brown fiber. She replaced them with quarter-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot at the cast-iron counterweight. When the first repaired sash rose without dropping, she opened and closed it several times simply to hear the weights move inside the wall. On the final window, her knife reached the lower corner just as a chickadee landed on a walnut branch outside. The bird turned its black-capped head toward the glass, close enough for Ines to see the small rise of its breathing. She stopped with the putty knife still in her hand. The chickadee remained until the last bead was smoothed, then lifted into the pale February sky. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Ines completed her first full clock dial. She began with a copper blank, coated it in powdered white enamel, and fired it slowly until the surface fused into glass. After cooling, she transferred 12 guide points with the fine dividers marked Elena Serrano. The Roman numerals took 3 evenings. Each black stroke dried 12 minutes before she corrected its edge with a sharpened pegwood stick. At the center, she painted a 4-leaf rose, one leaf turned slightly inward. The finished dial was not perfectly round. Near the 7th hour, a dark speck had settled beneath the enamel. Ines left it there. She mounted the dial in a restored walnut wall clock and hung it above the work table. Its pendulum moved with a low measured beat that filled the room without disturbing it. The loft had changed without losing its old proportions. White pine floors reflected the stove fire, the 8 windows lifted smoothly on their cotton cords. Shelves held labeled pigments, wrapped brushes, and shallow trays of unfinished dials. The lead-lined paint box remained empty, except for Elena's journal sealed behind glass within its hidden compartment. During the previous February, while repairing the cellar steps, Ines had found a small oak box wedged beneath the 3rd granite tread. It contained a brass key whose bow was shaped like the Serrano rose, and a 1903 tintype of a young woman standing outside the loft with a dial brush in her hand. The inscription named her as Isabel Serrano, daughter of Tomas, age 25. For nearly 2 years, the key remained on the mantel. Then, on a cold Sunday, after the first completed dial, sunlight struck a patch of metal among the roots of the largest walnut tree. Ines knelt and cleared away moss, revealing a brass plate fixed to the trunk's sheltered side. Its keyhole had been hidden beneath a rotating cover shaped like a leaf. The key entered without resistance. Inside the hollow was a narrow copper cylinder. Ines carried it to the work table and opened it beneath the hanging clock. A folded 48-star American flag filled most of the space, protected by waxed cloth. Beneath it lay a note dated October 19, 1918. Isabel had written to her daughter Elena after news arrived from France. She did not promise that Gabriel would return. She wrote only that the shop would remain open, his tools would remain clean, and his child would be taught the work of careful hands. The final line asked Elena to place the flag where grief could not make it public property. Ines refolded the flag along its original seams. She placed it in an archival box with Isabel's note and carried Gabriel's victory medal to Riverside Cemetery in Waterbury on November 11, 2025. There was no ceremony. She stood beside the Veterans Memorial while rain darkened the names cut into granite. A groundskeeper named Mr. Larkin helped her fasten a small temporary ribbon beneath Gabriel's engraved entry in the cemetery's memorial register. At 11 o'clock, the courthouse bell sounded. Ines removed her hat. Of the hidden money, she used 4 coins. 1 paid for the enamel furnace. 1 purchased a set of hand-ground sable brushes. 2 were sold to repair the foundation beneath the north wall. The remaining currency and coins stayed wrapped in their original cloth and paper, placed inside a new steel box behind the lead lining. Ines added an envelope to the cash. On its face, she wrote for the next one. The shop reopened without a sign in a newspaper. Doris placed an index card on the cafe corkboard between a piano lesson notice and an advertisement for seasoned firewood. Clock dial repair, hand-painted enamel patient work, only Old Clock Lane. The first customer brought a kitchen clock wrapped in a bath towel. The second mailed a cracked railroad dial from Vermont. By spring, more than 40 names were written in a small mailing ledger. Ines accepted only what she could complete without hurrying. Caleb returned one April afternoon, taller than when he had first arrived on his Schwinn. He carried a wooden sign wrapped in canvas. He had carved Serrano dial rooms across the upper board, following the faint letters of the original. Beneath them, in smaller type, he had added 2 words, "and daughters." Ines traced the fresh-cut letters with one finger. "There was only one daughter," she said. Caleb set the sign against the wall. "There's never only one." They hung it above the door before supper. The chickadees had returned to the walnuts, and the river was loud with snowmelt. From the road, the new words could be seen only when the evening light crossed them. That night, Ines opened a clean ledger beneath the restored clock. She sharpened a pencil, tested it in the margin, and began a letter. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote that the roof had held, that the chimney drew clean, and that the original window still bent the winter light. She described the danger of luminous compounds plainly. She recorded the names of the women from Elena's journal and the locations of copies sent to a university archive and a labor history collection. Then she wrote instructions for the work, how to warm enamel without startling the copper, how to recognize a brush that had become too dry, how to stop before fatigue turned a deliberate line careless. She did not write that the building had saved her. Buildings could offer shelter, but they could not choose what people did inside them. The choice had belonged to Mrs. Harrow when she opened the old file to Samuel, when he opened his ledger to Amos, when he climbed the roof, and to Ines each morning she returned to the bench. Some things do not disappear. They wait for careful hands. She folded the unfinished letter and placed it beside Elena's journal. There would be time to complete it. Outside, the new sign moved slightly in the April wind, while the clock dial painter's loft waited. It has always waited. Years later, Mrs. Harrow still kept the 6 worn dollar bills in the lowest drawer of her desk. She had replaced the green thread around them twice, but never spent them. When a new clerk once asked why county money was stored there, Mrs. Harrow closed the drawer and said it was not county money anymore. It was the price of a door. The Heroic Veteran Dogs is a fictional channel created to entertain, educate, and inspire the audience by exploring the deep, loyal bond between veterans and their dogs. All channel content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is entirely coincidental.